mean, I think from the perspective of UNCTAD, we see this opportunity to reframe the African financial architecture basis is to rethink the role of development finance. And while there's been a lot of concentration so far on in the discussion around the specific institutions that need to be in place, which of course are important, I think there is at least as much need to talk about the need to consider the policy or the meso approach of these institutions. And I think to the point that was raised from the floor, Mr. Bradlow said, why do you think new institutions would be better than what we've got already? And I think part of this issue is to think about how do you reframe this policy space so that you start thinking about how would you restructure an African monetary fund? How would you think about things like, SDRs if you were the African Monetary Fund? How would you think about debt sustainability? And I think one of the things that we are working on within the space here in UNCTAD is to think about debt sustainability not merely as something that relates to the repayment of the creditor, but crucially to say, are you debt sustainable so that you can actually achieve structural transformation of your economy, as, for example, put into the basket of the Sustainable Development Goals? Can you achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which means no poverty, access to education, access to health, investment into climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and so on? Are you debt sustainable from that perspective? And that, remember, is a different way of seeing things than simply saying, can you immediately repay your creditors? And to the point that was made by Patrick earlier, yes, if you only see debt sustainability as repaying your creditors and, if it's all forgiven, you're going to get more debt. Of course you're going to get more debt. Why? Because you have to develop. And so I think we need to start really opening up not only this strong call, which comes from the session, about ensuring that there is a collective African voice that provides a call and a determination to create something new, but it really has to be quite specific in terms of how is it going to create that new thing. And so, for example, I would suggest that one of the things that needs to be done is to reclaim something like the development capacity for the SDRs. If you're going to issue SDRs, then you need to see them as something that contributes towards development. So it's not something that you're going to do only when there is a global pandemic, but, for example, something that is done fairly regularly in the process of pushing developing countries into the space where they can address not only their current debt demands, but their longer transformational program. And I think this is the moment to start talking about those things, because as my colleague Stephanie mentioned earlier, this is a very pivotal time where we cannot deny that we are in a drastic economic situation. We know that the fiscal space for all countries has worsened since COVID. And it's worsened most, actually, for the advanced economies, but that's because they had the most fiscal space. But it has worsened for LICs and for upper mix and for lower mix. At the same time, UNCTAD is increasingly saying, when we talk about a financing gap, please let's not just talk about the SDGs. Let's talk about a development financing gap. Let's think about the gap that we need, not only to repay our debts, not only to deal with external flows, not only to deal with macro risks like a possibility of a recession next year, and not only the SDG achievement, but all of them together and together with the COVID expenditure. And then we start to understand how much of a need we are in as in developing countries, and particularly Africa. When you look at the development gap like that, the gap is now 30% of GDP of lower income countries per year. At the same time, sub-Saharan Africa has been unique in a way in that it has had net capital outflows throughout the period of the end of 2020 to 2022. And we uniquely as Africa need to do something about ensuring that there are capital controls so that that does not continually denude us of resources.
Okay, thank you.
And then finally, we need to see this also in the context of the climate crisis. Just in the last 2 years, there have been 131 extreme weather events in Africa alone. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Penelope. And I think